This is Elise and Charlotte from the Brown Deer Public Library. We are librarians there, and we're bringing you our book club for the title for the month. We are doing Cilka's Journey by Heather Morris. For those of you that don't know, it is the sequel to The Tattooist of Auschwitz, but with different characters and further on down the line. So without further ado, let's get into the book. Charlotte, if you wouldn't mind clicking to the next slide. So a little background information. By the end of World War II, millions of Jews had been killed, and approximately 250,000 of them Jews were still in concentration camps. Unfortunately, this didn't actually end when the war was over. While some did make their way out, others ended up trapped in the very same camps, unable to leave, stuck as DPs or displaced persons, or those that had Bolshevik and socialist tendencies tried to return to places like Poland, only to find that they were seen as outsiders, unclean, contaminated, all that stuff, and killed. And then there were others that were those, especially behind the Iron Curtain, that suddenly found themselves transferred to work camps in Siberia due to said contamination with Western ideals, and or seen to have been colluding with Nazis simply by way of how they were how they had survived in the concentration camps. Next slide, please. And others, once they were released from the camps, were forced into becoming Russian citizens rather than returning to the countries of their origin and or choosing. Even the Russian soldiers weren't even spared this fate, as Stalin believed that any individual that was had encountered the West was irrevocably contaminated by those ideals. And though not very many actually survived the POW camps, they then got sent to Siberia to work camps there. Next slide. So that's the background on the book. And so now we're going to be discussing the book, the storyline itself. So I've got a few questions here that we can discuss. We don't have to discuss all of them, but we'll see what we get to. Okay?
Okay.
So there's a couple of things that get repeatedly mentioned, and I think I've got a couple of questions on this first one. But one of the things that she mentions is continually finding herself being singled out, whether it's to be a prison wife, or being stuck in charge of the death bunker, or ending up in other seemingly good positions that actually cause her more hardship and putting more strain on her. So why do you think she continues to be singled out?
It sounds like she's beautiful and clever, and that it's not completely random that she is enacting on these opportunities well. She's not,
which is also putting her into that singled out status, because she actually singles herself out, right?
Partially. Like, I think that she needed to be both beautiful and clever to survive in the way that she did. And she didn't choose to be beautiful, but then she kind of knows what to do with that beauty. She kind of understands these abusive relationships of how to stay in them in a way that benefits her and helps her survive.
Okay. Yeah, I sort of think that part of it is, I mean, yes, she is beautiful, yes, she is clever, but a few of them are also based off of her choices, despite the fact that she continually says she has none. Because she is going, well, for instance, she sees the nursery and its horrible conditions that are literally killing the kids that are in there through neglect. And she chooses to go to the doctor and say something. That's technically, she gets singled out for that, but it's because she herself put herself in that position.
And other times when she's been caring, like when she was concerned about her friend who burned her hand, that's what got her into the hospital, which got her noticed for other skills. So she kind of continues to engage with, how can we make this better within my limited power? What I found interesting, and it's a little tangent on this, is that she doesn't like being singled out. She's very nervous about it whenever it happens. Even if it seems like a very good thing, like a better position, she's very aware of the consequences of being singled out for a better treatment.
And I thought another tangential comment in relation to what you just said, she not only is aware of being singled out, positive and negative, she's also aware of when to make sure that she does appear strong, when to make sure she appears almost invisible, which I thought was very interesting, because that can be a very hard and narrow road to walk. So let's see here. Actually, I think we covered all three of those to some extent, unless you have something to say about her character or something about her being singled out.
For her character, I think it was, if we're just looking at this as a work of fiction, I don't think it was that realistic that she doesn't seem to have any faults. But for what the work is trying to do, it's trying to kind of show survival and how these women work together and relied on each other in these difficult situations, and how they all found different ways of surviving. I don't think it was necessary to give her flaws.
Though she is actually a real person. She did actually find herself in this situation.
Right, but the all of her thoughts and choices that she makes within the gulag, that's mostly made up, or made up on other people.
True, and they did say that they had limited resources to work with.
Right, and so her kind of internal obstacles, like she has some trauma from the previous prison where they were treated worse, but that's, and she worries about shame of things she did there. But in terms of character growth and showing that, I feel like it kind of went from she's willing to be blackmailed because she's ashamed of what happened in the previous prison to she wants to tell her friends about it. It didn't like show that growth,
right,
or show her struggling with it. It never got fully in her head, but I think that was also important because there's horrible things happening and we aren't experiencing that trauma because it's told in third person. It's focusing on like the first night the men come into the hut and rape everyone. It doesn't focus on the horror of it. It focuses on the two friends holding hands.
Which also is sort of a defense mechanism too. When you're in that situation, you're not going to be focusing on what's happening to you. You're going to do everything to escape mentally from that situation. And I think the idea of two friends being able to escape somewhat just by holding one another's hands does actually lend some realism to it.
Okay, should we go to the next slide?
I think so, yes. We've got a few to go through.
There is repeated discussion about changing rules and whether it is better to stand out or fade into the background. What do you think was better in this situation? Do you mean like in the hospital in the nursery?
I think I was more discussing the fact, we sort of talked about it on the last slide, but how there are times at which, for instance, when she's, the moment when they're figuring out who's going to be who's prison wife and whatnot, she makes sure she stands up tall, is very strong, is very sure of herself, and yet other times she, for instance, she knows better than to give her own opinion. She keeps telling Josie to make sure she stays in the background, and then all of a sudden she flips position. So I think we mostly talked about it. We haven't talked about Alexander, or whether we knew any of this stuff in Russian history. As far as Alexander goes, I think part of it was also just another version of a mental escape for her, to have fallen in love with him without too much actual contact. You get through the first half of the book, and you've heard of him maybe once, until
I think they've had a few conversations.
They did minor ones, sort of, but as of chapter, I want to say it's 15, she only had one moment of contact with him where she discovered that he was Czech. And so the rest of the discussion of him is actually strictly the second half of the book. And that's primarily, what was it, when she finds him injured?
There's also the scene where she's fired and he takes her back to the hut.
Yeah. I had forgotten about that one.
Yeah, I think there's a series of small scenes, and maybe her mind is kind of expanding on that connection because there's a void of connections. When she finds him at the last minute, sure, I don't think that's realistic, but I think that was important to the ending, that in this scramble of everyone being released, that you can't say goodbye, that you can't figure out a way of contacting people. There's not Facebook.
No. Oh. Actually, that would be probably creepy if there were Facebook back at that time. But the act of not being able to say goodbye, of losing contact with one another, that I do agree, that is believable.
The next question, did you know about this element of Russian history? I didn't, and I was surprised that she's not angrier. I think there's like one or two moments where she feels like it's not fair, but like she doesn't dwell on that. She's busy surviving.
And I admit, other than one or two elements of Russian history, I don't know a whole lot of Russian history. I probably should know more. So after this, I'll probably do a little bit more research. But yeah, I had no idea about that part of World War II.
Right. When I learned about it in school, it just focused on how happy the Jewish prisoners were when the Americans came in and saved them.
Yeah, you don't hear about them trying to go to Poland and getting slaughtered again, or being recaptured and being told that because you survived, oh my gosh, you were a traitor to every nation out there, and so you have to be recaptured.
It was also fascinating the ways that, like, the Gulag was technically better than the concentration camps because the goal was to keep them alive.
Yeah.
But a lot of the horrors were still there.
Yeah.
It just didn't
They
end
might
in
have
death.
a fresh coat of paint, but
okay, next slide.
yes. So what I'm talking about in this first question, about her giving up the chance at freedom to keep Josie from losing her child, is she does such a good job with the commander's daughter that she earns a favor, and instead of using it for herself to get away, she uses it to make sure that Josie can keep her child instead of going to an orphanage.
I think Cilka knows how much stronger she is than Josie, and she's kind of been caring for Josie the whole time, and probably feels like Josie is kind of replacing her dead sister.
I would definitely agree with that part. I think also at this point, she's seen so many mothers and daughters being separated. Her and her own mother being a prime example, that she wants to see a pair being able to be together, being able to escape this horrible situation.
There was a scene in the nursery where she kind of wonders if this is her purpose, that she's convinced she'll never be able to have children because of the trauma of Auschwitz.
Yes, and all the physical effects it has done besides the mental.
Right. I don't mean that she's mentally unable to have children. She thinks she's physically unable to have children.
But she also mentions how she thinks of men, and how she hopes that's not ends up being the case also, because that also can lead to, well, I'm not going to have kids.
Yeah. So for the next question, I didn't read Tattooist of Auschwitz, so you'll have to answer this on your own.
From everything I've heard, I know a number of people. I myself have not read The Tattooist of Auschwitz, as on my to-do list. But everybody I've heard has been, the main thing that they come away with from Tattooist of Auschwitz is, one, they were not expecting to enjoy it as much as they did. Two, that they learned a lot from it. I think those are the two big ones. I think that Cilka's journey just certainly had both of those elements for me. Having not read Tattooist, I can't actually give a preference, but I do think it was a successful sequel.
Yeah. I think I'd be willing to read Tattooist of Auschwitz. I went into Cilka's journey thinking, just based on the description, that she's rescued from Auschwitz and sent to prison, that sounds horrible, without even knowing the extent to which gulags treated people horribly.
Yeah, I mean, they have a bad, they're stereotypically bad, but you don't have any information out there as to what's actually going on in them.
But in Cilka's journey, it focused so much on her strength that I assume in Tattooist of Auschwitz, it would also focus on his strength and survival. And so hopefully we'll get kind of a distant view of the trauma and not a flashy, oh my gosh, trauma. So I might be willing to read that.
Yeah, from what I've read, there was more direct contact between the writer and the main character of The Tattooist of Auschwitz. Cilka's journey, I believe he actually talked to her about Cilka, and that's how she found out about it.
At the end of the audiobook I listened to for Cilka's journey, there was an interview with the author, and it explains that she has extensive interviews with the Tattooist of Auschwitz, and that multiple people she interviewed mentioned Cilka. And that the Tattooist of Auschwitz said that Cilka is the bravest person he ever met.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what piqued so many people's interest in Cilka.
Yeah. So.
And it does make me wonder about kind of the real life of Cilka,
Mm-hmm.
that there were a lot of mixed records, that in the book we see she yells at the women being sent on the death trains to move faster, and she treats them harshly so that the guards won't hurt them. But we don't really have a way of knowing if that's how it went down or not. You know, she could have been kind of
it would be a
taking
little
out her
hard to get
trauma on other
answers from those
people.
people.
Yeah. Okay, what
What's the
questions
next
would you
one?
have for Cilka if she were here today? Yeah, I would ask her how much of this is true, and
And maybe get her spin on things.
how much choice she felt she had. I feel like that came up a lot.
Yeah, and that was definitely a core question, considering how many times the author referenced the idea of not having any choices. So.
All right, are there any more questions? Yes, there are.
I think there is. Yes, I have quite a few. We can go a little faster if you want.
She didn't really have a choice with this. I mean,
Yeah.
I think her mother was correct that she wouldn't have been able to prevent it from happening, and that even if she'd prevented it, her mother would have still died, and it would have just put Cilka in a worse position. So yeah, that was the right choice, but it helped that her mother helped her make that choice.
And I think that's in it too. I think some of her strength she actually got from her mother, and the bravery her mother showed in how she faced being sent to the gas chamber. We've definitely covered this next one about a lack of choice.
So Cilka is often seen being cruel to be kind. Who else has a similar personality?
The idea of playing the monster in order to protect somebody, protect the person that they're.
Do you have someone in mind for this question?
This one actually I got from somebody else, so no, I don't. Okay. It sounded like a good question, so I included it. I guess we do have a decent number of people, if not necessarily being a monster per se, at least seeming rather harsh, but really what they're trying to do is they're trying to protect the character or prepare the character or do the right thing. It's just not always easy for them, or it's not always
and I think the bigger thing is the sacrifice of perception.
Yeah.
That as the reader, we know that Cilka had a good reason, but there's so many people that thought she was a traitor and didn't know that they were being saved from a beating. So I think that's kind of an additional level of selflessness that no one's ever going to thank her. Lots of people assume she's the horrible person, and then she has to live with that guilt and shame of feeling like a horrible person. And really, no one asked her to prevent some beatings. And she just impulsively wanted to because she's a good person, and these were the limits of her power was to feign cruelty.
Yeah, and sometimes difficult choices do require one to at least seem cruel. So
I think in the Gulag, though, she didn't have to pretend to be cruel.
Right. Most of the cruelty was usually seen in the flashbacks.
And I think that helped her bond more, that she really needed to be close to people. And she kind of got to take on this new status where her sacrifices for Josie were very visible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next page. These are the last two.
There we go. So it's part historical fiction and part memoir. Yeah. So the author is clearly very sympathetic towards Cilka. What's your own attitude towards Cilka? I suspect that the real Cilka had more flaws.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a guess. Like, obviously, I don't know her. But I think it's a beautiful story, and I like the way it was told. That, I don't know, if you're trying to survive and show a character surviving, you don't really need them to have flaws. The outside world is flawed enough.
Mm-hmm. I think that sometimes the flaws actually help us bond more with a character.
Right, it was kind of hard to bond with Cilka.
At
I mean,
least
I bonded with her in other ways.
Yeah, but I actually found myself a bit closer to Yelena, the doctor.
Mm.
There was some genuine feeling in there that I don't think quite made it into Cilka, even as Cilka was selflessly giving up this or looking to help with that. There was a slight lack, and I don't think I originally even realized it until I actually started thinking about this about her character and the lack of those flaws. That I realized that I hadn't really bonded with her as much as I thought, as one would assume that I did.
I think I really related to her desire to shield the women around her as much as possible, and how she kind of played with how much attention to try to get.
Yeah.
Okay. Which of the women do you least like? I'm going to go with Hannah. I just...
She didn't allow herself very much lovableness, did she?
Right, even her death I didn't find very redeeming, because she kind of had this different ethical standard,
mm-hmm.
And really judged Cilka for what she did to survive. And even to the point where she blackmailed and shamed Cilka for this and made Cilka feel more shame. I think
part of it was also, though, that she didn't have a lot of introspection and didn't really didn't really understand the full situation of what Cilka had gone through.
She didn't try to understand.
No, she didn't. And I think that's definitely a fatal flaw. But I think that if she had tried to understand, she might have not. But I think because it interfered with her end goals, that's the main reason why she didn't.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I did kind of want to know if we know what kind of job the real life Cilka had after she left.
I don't know. I saw one article in regards to what her stepson thought of the book, but I didn't really see anything too much on her actual life when I was doing my research.
And when I post this to YouTube, I will attach all the links on this screen in the description.
Mm-hmm. I will say that the YouTube video is a bit odd. It's well researched and it has a lot of good information, but the music soundtrack was a little distracting. You might want to just when you guys watch it, you might just want to mute the sound on it and just watch what it's saying, because it's pretty much just music and the pictures and the text. So.
Okay, great. Thank you for joining us for our discussion of Cilka's journey, and feel free to comment. We look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah. Bye. Bye.